I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives.
Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is Mark Swinney, who is a Christian Science practitioner for the First Church of Christ Science. Welcome aboard, sir. Glad to have you here.
It's great to be here.
We're going to have a wonderful show. We've kind of prepped you all for this last week who are watching. We're going to talk about how spirit heals. And today's prophetic topic is spiritual sense of being. And this phrase comes from the book written by Mary Baker Eddy entitled Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. It's chapter 10, page 298, line 20, which reads as follows. Spiritual ideas, like numbers and notes, start from principle and admit no materialistic beliefs. Spiritual ideas lead up to their divine origin, God, and to the spiritual sense of being. And so we're going to get into all this and what this all means. But before we do that, Mark, introduce yourself. Tell them how you come to be a Christian Science practitioner, what's your path, and whatever you think is relevant.
Well, my name is Mark Swinney, and I was born in Albuquerque, and I wasn't always a Christian Scientist. It didn't always happen that way, but early on, when I was about in first grade, my father he started reading that book you mentioned, this book. I brought a copy of it today, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. He started reading this book along with his Bible. He wasn't really a religious person, but he was into it. I could tell. And about 3 months later, after he first got this book, started studying it and learning about what healing is and praying and how that all connects together, he took me up skiing up on Sandia Peak one day. I was just a little kid. Now, this was a long time ago. And the ski equipment wasn't as good then as it is now. And so I remember I was kind of traversing across a hill, and my father, he was watching me from up above there. And I fell. My leg spun all the way around, but the binding didn't release, and it broke my leg. Now, I remember I'm lying there in the snow, just crying, and a man who worked for the ski area, a ski patrolman, he came up to me, and through my tears, I tried to tell him to spin my leg back around. I thought if he would just do that, it would stop hurting. I didn't know, of course, that they're trained not to do that. Anyway, well, they got my ski off and got me down the hill. My dad got me into the car. In those days, you couldn't take the tramway up to the ski area. You had to take you had to drive around the long way. So he did that, and he loved me very, very much. I just was the apple of his eye, and for me to be hurting like that, I know it just it was hard for him. He did something unusual. Instead of doing what he normally would have done and taken me to the hospital, he took me home. And I remember I was in the living room. My leg was kind of bent at a bad angle. And that sounds just like a terrible picture. And I was sitting in the living room floor with my leg on a pillow. And my father, he was sitting in a chair there, reading the Bible and this book, Science and Health. He wanted to have some ideas on how to pray for me. Now, my brother, he was watching television across the room. This sounds like something that's almost, irresponsible, but listen to what happens next. It's really interesting.
You were in pain at this point.
I'm hurting. I'm not crying anymore.
Okay.
But I'm hurting, and I'm sitting there. And I see my father in this chair with the Science and Health open and his Bible open, and he's praying. And I tell you, I still was angry at that ski patrolman for not turning my leg around, and so I didn't want to have anything to do with what my dad was doing. I didn't know what he was doing. But you know how it is with your parents, I saw him trying, and I thought, okay, all right, fine. I don't know what he's doing, but I'm going to give in to whatever it is. Whatever that may be, however he's trying to help me, I'm going to give in. And so I see him praying, and even though I was in first grade, this was probably one of the 3 or 4 defining moments of my life, because I stood up, I walked across the living room floor and turned the channel on the television. We didn't have a channel changer. I turned the channel on the television. I was completely well, completely healed at that moment. Now, when that happened, you can imagine my life was changed. It was very different. From then on, whenever I was in trouble of any kind, I wanted my dad to pray for me.
So you saw the immediate connection between your father's prayers and your recovery physically.
It was remarkable. It was just remarkable. You can imagine what an effect that would have on a guy who's in first grade.
Did you feel anything when the healing was happening?
Yes, I did. That's an interesting question. I felt the love of God, but I didn't know that's what it was when I felt it. I just felt the warmth and love of God when I stood up. I didn't even think to myself, wow, this is going to hurt if I stand up. I just felt that love of God, and just spontaneously I stood up. And when I stood up, I thought, I don't like that show. I'm going to go change the channel. I'm just in first grade, And from that point on, I became very interested in it. Even though I'm only in first grade, all of a sudden life's different. Everything that I thought was a given really wasn't. I didn't know there was this power in God. I didn't know that prayer could actually heal. I thought prayer was just something you did at night when you went to bed, and that was it. Now I lay me down to sleep. I had no clue that the power of God could do something like heal.
How did the rest of the family react to this?
I wish I could remember. I don't know what my brother did. I can't remember. My father, that cinched it for him. I know that not long after that, he really began to study that book. And in the years since, it's been a lot of years since, I've had other similar type healings and prayed with other people who have had healings. And it's something that I couldn't imagine devoting myself to in any other way. I have to do this. You could imagine, you know what I mean? You'd want to do this. And I know people here in Santa Fe, Santa Fe, these people, this is a praying group. People pray here. People pray all over the United States. They do. But in Santa Fe, they're not shy about it. And so if we can maybe talk today about different ways that we can kind of boost people's prayers and help them do what they're already doing, wow, it'd be worth it to have a show like that.
Okay, we can get there. Before we even do that, though,
yes,
let's go back to the origins. Talk about Mary Baker Eddy,
yes,
the book,
yes,
Christian Science,
good,
and so people get a better feel for what it is you're talking about.
All right. Mary Baker Eddy, the author of that book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, this book, she did not start out with the intention of creating some religion. She had a similar experience as I had. Hers was a little more drastic. She was involved in an accident when a physician examined her. He said it's fatal. This was about 150 years ago, almost. And she called for her Bible, and she had been, all her life, she'd been really a student of the Bible. She just loved the Bible. She called for her Bible. She read something about Jesus' healings, and it dawned on her that life, her life actually is spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I know that's a word that's thrown around a lot today.
So let's define it.
Spiritual.
Yes.
What does it mean to you?
Anything pertaining to the Spirit.
That's it. I agree. Anything that pertains to the Spirit. And you know what? You and I, we pertain to the Spirit because we're the evidence, we're the expression of the Spirit. And Mary Baker Eddy saw that she just wasn't some sort of a, and this is like a main point of her whole message in Science and Health. It's not like we're just sort of material shells with some spiritual aspects or spiritual qualities mixed in. Because we pertain to the Spirit, like produces like. If God is 100% Spirit, then we're actually spiritual, completely spiritual. And she glimpsed that and was healed. She wrote about it. It's interesting. She said in her book, she says, for 3 years after this happened, she says, for 3 years after my discovery, I sought the solution of this problem of mind healing, searched the scriptures and read little else, kept aloof from society, and devoted time and energies to discovering a positive rule. The search was sweet, calm, and buoyant with hope, not selfish nor depressing. I knew the principle of all harmonious mind action to be God, and that cures were produced in primitive Christian healing by holy uplifting faith. But I must know the science of this healing. And I won my way to absolute conclusions through divine revelation, reason, and demonstration. So, in other words, she had this healing. You know, she called for her book, for her Bible. She recognized to a degree that life actually is spiritual, that she's an expression of God who is spirit. And instead of dying, she lived and was well. Same kind of thing right away. Those quick healings like that, you know, it sounded like healings that had happened in the Bible. And that's what she means. She was so curious about that. So for 3 years, she just studied the Bible and studied and studied. And then not only did research in the Bible, but worked to help other people and demonstrate it, you know, to do the experiments, you know, to see how it all works. And she wrote this book then. She hoped that all denominations would just use it to benefit all the people in their churches, but they didn't. Some denominations did, but most just were kind of critical of it because a lot of people were interested in going to hear Mary Baker Eddy talk about it rather than going to their own church. And so those ministers and deacons and priests all, you know, started to badmouth her. And so after a while, she just made her own church. But today, she still, if you were to talk to her, she wouldn't say, Science and Health is just for Christian Scientists. No way. It's to help you right where you are. There's just one God. There's just one man. There's just one of us. It's one big group. And we need to help one another. And if prayer can do this for people, it's worth discovering it for ourselves and implementing it.
So it's not so much recipes of how to deal with certain things. It's just guiding and enhancing the power of the Spirit in the individual, guiding them to a place of connecting to their own spirit and then maybe amplifying, magnifying it.
That's the only way it works. You got it right on the button. It's not some sort of like mind over matter thing where you're just going to think really hard. My leg is well, my leg is well. I've never been able to do anything like that. But what you just said, you said it's that connection to the Spirit. It's the power through which Spirit is operating in thought. That is what does it. It's the power of God that transforms thought, and that's what heals.
So what I'm really doing with the prayer, what I'm really doing with this whole process then, is trying to raise my spirit, my vibration from a lower level where I can feel the pain to a higher level. Not only I don't even feel the pain, but because divine is perfect, there's nothing going to be wrong with me.
That's exactly it. That's not always easy to do. I'm sure the people who are viewing tonight will tell you that sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do, but you've hit it right on the button. It's to transcend a little bit, to transcend just what we're seeing with our 5 physical senses and become in tune with the presence of God.
So, how much of this healing happens from the individual? How much of it happens from the people praying for the individual? Can somebody be healed who doesn't believe in the process just because the people are praying for them? Or do they have to buy into it as well?
You don't have to buy into it. It happens all the time. People are helped, and they really they don't have to have any faith in it or anything like that. Faith, I have found that kind of human faith, I just have faith. It's good, but it kind of runs out after a while, you know what I mean? It's tough to just do it with kind of your own will. It's not that at all. Like you say, it's to really get out of the way and let the Spirit, let God operate in your thought. Now, let's talk about that exact process, because it's an interesting thing how it works. In the preface of this book, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, this is just at the very beginning. The author explains this process really for the first time. She says this in 2 sentences. She says, the physical healing of Christian Science results now, as in Jesus' time, from the operation of divine principle, before which sin and disease lose their reality in human consciousness and disappear as naturally and necessarily as darkness gives place to light and sin to reformation. Now, this is an interesting point she's making here, because, here she says, the operation of divine principle. She uses that word principle sometimes as a name for God. And the operation of divine principle, it causes sin and disease not just to lose reality on a human body, but to lose reality in human consciousness. That is a big step. Because most of the time when we pray, we say, God, please fix my leg. Please fix my boss. Please fix my bank account. We're praying at, physical things. But here in this case, we're talking about a body. We're praying at a body most of the time. That's how I started out. But here she's saying that the operation of divine principle, in other words, the power of the Spirit, the power of God, operates in human consciousness first. It's human consciousness that determines our experience. And so it makes sense that consciousness is what we're going to address. So let me give another example.
So we're going to raise the consciousness.
We're going to raise the consciousness with the power of God, not just with human will. Yes.
So that self-will determination has no relevancy.
It really doesn't.
Exactly.
That's usually what got you in trouble in the first place.
Exactly. So it's trying to cure the problem with the same instrument creating the problem.
It is. Exactly right.
So my next question to me is like, why is it called Christian Science instead of Christian Spirit?
Well, the idea of it being a science is a good question.
There's no science in this.
Science is something that's provable. A lot of times, here we're talking about addressing our thought with the power of God. And if that's something repeatable, then it's a science. If it's something that just happens once in a while, it's a miracle. You know what I mean? In miracles, who can trust a miracle that it's going to happen? Sometimes you say, I'm hoping for a miracle, but I don't know. But if it's something that I know if I change my thought with the power of God, that will change my experience, in a way that's scientific. It's something provable and demonstrable. That's the only reason it's science. It is, like you say, the power of the Spirit. I can tell you've experienced that a lot, where God moves in you. And then you love God enough to believe what you've been given or what you've been told. And that is what Christian Science is all about.
So that belief, in a lot of ways, is the determining factor in what they would call the placebo effect or remembered wellness.
Yeah.
The going back to that, I am spirit, I am perfect as I am, and I am not subject to pain or infirmity or whatever.
Sure. It is the placebo effect. In my opinion, I think that's more like human will, because then it's just my belief in the placebo.
Isn't belief a spiritual demonstration?
Exactly. It's more semantics we're talking about.
Okay.
When I think of it as, if I just repeat over and over again, I'm well, and I leave God out of it, I don't think, for me, nothing happens. Yet, the moment I invite what God has to say about me or think about me, the moment I do that, and I let that become my thought, then I've got the power of God behind the thought, and that's what heals.
So then the medications and stuff are superfluous.
Well, once you've experienced this kind of healing, it's like having a calculator rather than just doing the math on paper. It's a lot easier to use the calculator. And so if I know I can change my thought with the power of God to help myself, that's going to do everything. How's, an aspirin going to change my thought like God can? Now, that doesn't mean to say that people who take medicine are somehow, they don't have spiritual qualities and they don't love God or anything like that. No. It's more about just once you've seen this healing power, the power that Jesus demonstrated for people, when you feel this same power inside yourself, you want it. You just want that. It can do so much more than just matter.
Did Mary Baker Eddy suggest particular prayers or particular, techniques to use this to more focus the power?
All right, that's a good question. Let's do this. This is not a question I've ever asked him yet, but have you ever prayed and had physical healing? Maybe you had, the flu or a headache or something like that.
Now it's a good question. I like that question. I don't so much pray as I withdraw my consciousness from my physical and put it into my spirit, so to speak.
I wish I could hug him on TV here. You got it. That's exactly it. So often, I know when I first thought about praying, I thought of it as like an active sprint where I'm going to have to do a lot of talking, and that was going to be the technique in which I reached God or something like that. It's nothing like that. Like you say, it's to be still, to withdraw.
Be still and know that I am.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
To withdraw and let God do the talking. In fact, I believe that prayer doesn't happen until God talks. Now, if you...
Explain that.
All right. It's easy for me to talk. You can tell already from hearing me on TV that I could talk all day. But it's only when the Spirit moves in my thought that prayer really is happening. So how do you make that happen? That's a real good question. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the answers come. But ever since I was little, I backpack up into the Pecos Wilderness up above Santa Fe. I just have always done that. I love it. And there are a lot of high mountain lakes up there, and maybe some of the viewers have been up to some of those lakes. But even if you haven't, let me describe. If you get up early in the morning by these lakes, often there isn't any wind at all early in the morning. And the lake, it's in the mountains, and it's just perfectly still, absolutely still. On the tranquil surface, you can see reflected from the other side the trees and the mountains. It's just beautiful. As soon as the wind comes up even a little bit, that image isn't so clear. All right, that's an analogy to how we do with our thought. I find that if I allow myself to be as still as that mountain lake, so that the reflection of the Spirit is present in my thought, then I'm getting somewhere. Now I've invited God into my prayer.
Now you're calling that prayer, and I'd call that meditation. Are we saying the same thing with two different names?
Maybe. I don't know. I think that even having a name for it, maybe we don't even need that.
That's probably true. You know, I mean, because to me, prayer has never been something that I request. Prayer has been what I would consider to reinforce the demonstrations I believe Spirit wants for me.
So what you're saying is then the prayer is sort of implementing what you were given when you were praying?
It's a means of me stating an intention for my basic surrender of self-will. So like, for instance, the last prayer I do in the morning is, thank you, God, for your presence in my life. Thank you for all that you provide for me. Thank you for all that you take from me. Thank you for all that you keep from me. And thank you for all that you allow me to do in your name.
Good.
And there's a couple others during the morning, that space out during my morning. I don't have just one sitting. You know, it's variety of things that happen throughout the course of the morning before I go out into the world, so to speak.
Yes.
But that's the last one I do.
Good.
You know,
I love it. What you're talking about is vital, and most of the time when people first begin to pray, they leave that part out. They have this great epiphany, maybe, as they listen to God, to the Spirit. They have this great epiphany, yet 10 minutes later they've forgotten what it was. It's important to take it forward into the day and do something with it so that your attitude, your thought, your behavior changes as a result of what you've been given.
I get the choice every morning to start off in God's will or self-will. And it's up to me to make that determination. And the easiest way for me to make that determination is to start my day with spiritual practice.
Good.
You know, and that takes it out into the day, and it heightens the awareness of it. But I want to go back on prayer for a second. How would you react to the statement that prayers of request are basically telling God I know better what I need for myself than God does?
What's that old saying? If you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. Or
Yeah.
how about this? Worse is when you come up with an idea or a plan and you ask God to bless it. I never see people get into trouble more than that.
So taking this back to the core of what we were talking about, I am not praying to get better in the Christian Science model. I am praying to be one with God.
Yes.
And whatever comes from that, comes from that.
That's it.
So are there times then where God's will for me is to continue to experience the ailment and the illness and I'm not going to get better?
Okay, great question. That's such an important question, because then we're talking about God as a God who allows pain and suffering, or even gives it to us as a means of teaching us, or something like that. I wouldn't say so. The best way I can talk about it, it really has to do with kind of that definition of those definitions of heaven and hell people wrestle with a lot of times. You know, hell in Christian Science isn't some place underground. Hell is something that is self-created. I can create hell perfectly well right here. I know I can do that. Was Mary Baker Eddy a reader, follower, believer of Emanuel Swedenborg? She knew of Emanuel Swedenborg, and since that time she has had people compare, her writings to his. The turning point, or the splitting point, is that she really goes with man as completely spiritual. Because
the reason I asked that was Swedenborg had some real basic definition. hell is any place with limitations.
Sure.
Heaven's any place without limitations. It's not another dimension. It's whether there's limitations or no limitations.
It is. And, everybody listening, everybody watching the show, we've all had our moments of hell. And we didn't have to go anywhere. But that wasn't something God gave us. It's something that was really self-created. God, as the Bible says, is love. God has only love to offer us. That's all God has. And the beauty of that, it's God's love that helps us clean up our act. It's not punishment or inflicting evil or pain on his children. It's the love that heals us.
It's allowing us to inflict the pain on ourselves, and then no judgment attached to that infliction.
It's like this. I was thinking about this analogy. If, let's say I were on a big ship, big tall ship, and they were going to let down the anchor, and the anchor was big as I am, and I grabbed a hold of the anchor. And as the anchor was going down into the water, as I held onto the anchor, the deeper I sank, the more I would suffer. The more I hung onto the anchor, the deeper I'd get and the worse it would be for me. No one is bringing that on but me. And so as soon as I let go of the anchor, I'm free to swim to the surface and get a breath of air. Sometimes instead of anchors, we hold on to hates, resentment, fear, all kinds of things.
We identify with things.
We identify and we hold on to it.
Yes.
And we will hold on until we get the lesson that it's time to let go.
So, okay, two separate questions. First then, group of people or one or two people, how many, which is question number 2. You're praying for somebody and there is no healing. So what you're saying is they are resisting it and they are holding on to whatever it is they've attached themselves to and they don't want to let go of it.
Sometimes, we both have helped people a lot. And in people's lives, sometimes the healings and the changes aren't quick. Sometimes they're slow, but those slow ones, it's sort of like changing the direction of the Queen Mary. It takes a long time to change the direction, but it is going to make a big difference once it's changed. And let me give you an example of this whole thing, and it gives a demonstration of this healing idea too. When I was growing up, because it talks about, I want to talk about a healing where I prayed for a while. When I was growing up, I just loved playing baseball. It's what I liked to play, and then I kept playing in college and beyond. One day, I was in a baseball game for my college. I went to UC Davis, and I was on second base. The guy who was hitting, who was batting, he got a base hit, and I saw the third base coach, my coach. He circled his arm saying, "Score, you're going to go all the way home." So I go all the way home. The outfielder threw the ball into the catcher. The catcher got it right at the moment that I was there, and I saw that we were going to have a collision. And we did. We collided. He dropped the ball. I was safe. But I hit the ground, and I broke my collarbone. And I stood up. I saw the umpire say safe. My eyes were kind of crossed because it was hurting. And I walked over to the bench. I didn't tell my coach or any of the trainers that I was hurt because I know that once I tell them that, it's going to be tough for me to, they'll take me out of my position for however long they think they need to, and it's going to be hard for me to regain it again. So I didn't tell them anything. And I asked one of the other coaches, I said, could you please just arrange for someone in my position to take my place? I don't feel all that great. And I left the dugout that moment, and I started walking home. And I began to pray, as we've been talking about. I started to listen. And, for the next 3 days, I just prayed, and I did something else. I read the Bible, and I read this book again. I just read this book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. I kept on reading because I was hurting, and I just needed to pour in good ideas because I needed some other kind of model. But just pouring in the ideas, that wasn't, that wasn't like the prayer that I'm talking about where we listen to God. It just was pouring it on, and then I would spend time listening and praying. So for 3 solid days, I didn't even go to school. All I did was pray. I didn't tell anybody on the baseball team that I was hurting this way. But I could feel through the skin that the bone didn't break through my skin, but I could feel that I was broken. And then I had a moment of that communing you're talking about, where you become still as that mountain lake we talked about, and let God talk. And I'd been doing this off and on. And so I think it was the 4th day, I got up early. I decided I was going to start going to classes again because finals were coming up. And I'm standing in front of the mirror, combing my hair with the good arm I could move. And I'm listening. I'm quiet and I'm listening. And as I sat there quietly listening in prayer that way, in this case, I was presented with some questions. The first question was an interesting one. The question was, Mark, is it possible for you to be 2 things at the same time? And I knew what that meant, because I'd been reading for 3 solid days about how I'm spiritual. And so I knew what this was going towards. I could feel it. And could I be both a physical being who has some nice spiritual aspects to him, or could I, and at the same moment, also be 100% made of the thought of God right now? Could I be those 2 things at the same moment? And I know I can't be 2 things at once. And I could see that this was leading me towards the next question. Now, I want to preface this a little bit because you've experienced this yourself. When this kind of thing happens, this could have been my thought, asking myself, could I be 2 things at once? It wasn't me talking at all. This was God talking. And what validated, what I knew that identified it, that it was God talking, was the love that I felt in my heart along with these questions. When I feel that kind of love in my heart along with those questions or that kind of information, I know it's God. All right, here's this question. Can you be 2 things at once? Can you be both material and spiritual, both at the same time? No. All right, the next question. If I say, okay, I'm spiritual, I'm made of your thought, divine spirit. That's my identity. And then the next question was beautiful. Did that spiritual creation, you, run into a catcher and get injured? Did that happen? And I said, no, of course not. How's a spiritual idea going to be hurt? You can't break up ideas. I took my comb, I threw it in the sink, I remember that day, and I went to school. It's UC Davis, where everybody rides bikes to school, and one of my roommates had brought my bike home 3 days before, and I rode my bike to school. And I'm sitting there in class like I normally would any other day. I was in an English class, about 11 o'clock, and all of a sudden I went, whoa, I was healed back in front of the mirror that morning. But I hadn't noticed that I was healed because I was much more interested in what God was telling me about my spiritual identity. I couldn't have ridden the bike to school if I wasn't 100%. And I went, holy mackerel, I can't believe that. What a wonderful thing. And I remember I went to baseball practice that day, and I never played better than I did that day. So the point is that I want to say here is it was a lot of days. I worked hard, and I didn't give up. I could have given up a lot of times, but sometimes it takes a while of communing with God, of working and listening, but most important, to love God enough to believe what He's telling you.
To love God enough to let go of whatever attachment we're holding on to.
Yes, and for me, I had to rerun that picture of the injury, and so I had to let go of that and embrace what God had said. He said, Mark, you're spiritual. And it makes sense that we're spiritual because like produces like. God has nothing physical about Him. There's nothing mortal about God. We've both seen, and probably all the viewers here have seen that picture on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It's the picture of God creating man, and it's like those 2 fingers about to touch. You know that one? That depiction of God, it's God as kind of a Zeus-like individual in the cloud. Now, I'm certain that the artist, he was just making that a symbol. But in any case, who knows? I don't know what that guy was thinking about all the way. But God to be ever present couldn't be a Zeus-like character in a cloud sitting in a golden chair. Divine Spirit is an omnipresent power, something that is totally good, completely loving, and actually is the source of yours and my identity. And so, like when I say like produces like, if God is 100% spirit, it's natural for his creation to be as spiritual as he is. Now, I know that that's a leap, because we're going to go to the store and do our regular day, and it all feels like we're doing it as mortal matter beings. Yet, a lot of things seem one way when they're actually another. And I have found that I couldn't have been healed like that if I was made of matter. That just couldn't have happened.
2 questions. In the Christian Science teachings, how do they deal, or do they deal with quantity versus quality? We're performing a healing. Do we need, more people will give you better, or just the belief of the people who are doing the healing sets the tone and the volume, so to speak?
Good question. I would say that because we're looking to the power of spirit, to the power of God as the healing agent, it doesn't really matter how many people are involved. I think of it this way. Suppose I was in a very cold, large room. If I were in a large, cold room, and there were a lot of other people in the room with me, I could, if I wanted, maybe walk over to the fireplace and start a fire so that I could get warm. And I could start that fire. Well, incidentally, everyone else in the room would get warm too. Now, let's think of it another way. Let's say I'm in a crowd of people. If I am on fire with what God has told me that day, everybody gets warm. Whether or not, when I see him in line at the store, when I'm driving next to them in the car, when I'm praying for them if they ask me for healing. It's the power of God that burns in me, and that's enough to warm the world.
But the power of God that burns in you would be directly related to your ability to let go of whatever you're holding on to.
I have a choice.
Yes.
I've got a choice to make, and I've got to either believe it, what God has given me, and let myself burn, burn within, or not. And that's the work I think we all have. It's the joy, though. You see, you can tell already from hearing me talk about all of this. I just love prayer. I love it. But here's what I like. This is the aspect I really love. Feeling that love of God when God gives me my answer to prayer, that's one thing. But my favorite thing to do in life, my favorite thing to do is to abandon what I used to think and embrace the new idea that God has given me. I love doing that. It says in the Bible, trust in the Lord with all your heart. It doesn't say trust in the Lord with 95% of your heart, with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. And I love doing that. I just love to let God talk and let that become what I think.
I'm going to switch a whole question here, slightly different direction. Christian Science, somebody was going to become a member. They would walk into their first morning. What would they experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like if they were going to, you mean if they went to a church or if
Yeah.
Okay. If you walk into the Christian Science Church, it's on Cordova Road here in Santa Fe. It's an interesting place in that it doesn't have a minister or a priest or a rabbi. It doesn't have like a person who's paid to be the minister of the church. When you go on a Sunday, instead, there's a Bible lesson that is it's read every Sunday, and it's something that all Christian Science churches are going to be studying. And so what happens is the membership of the church elects two people, one person to read the Bible and one person to read that book, Science and Health. And they read a lesson that is on a specific topic like life or love or atonement, things like that. And so you go in there and you'd sit down and you'd hear, you're singing some hymns and stuff like that, but it's a lesson that is meant to give you an opportunity to be still and listen to ideas, to commune with God, so that you leave a lot more balanced, and maybe you'll take with you an idea that God gives you in that quiet time.
Are there healings done at the services? Services is the right term
yes,
for it?
Yes, that's right, the services. Yes, healing has happened in those services. I've had some of my most dramatic healings right there in church. But it doesn't really matter if you go to, the building is nothing special. It's just, that's a time when I've done it.
Well, I would disagree with that statement. I think the building is special. You can't put that much divine energy in and not have the building transformed to reflect that energy.
You can feel it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, somebody can show up this coming Sunday.
Of course.
And just say, I need to be healed, heal me.
That's how it works.
And that's how it works.
Yeah, that's mostly how people first find out about it. They walk in. See, it's a big leap. Think about my father, in that healing I was talking about earlier, when he had initially taken his children to the doctor, and, that was what we did. And then instead to pray, that's a pretty big leap to pray. But you got to take that leap sometime in your life. You got to do it. That's how Jesus healed. He healed through the power of God. And you see that over and over and over in the Bible. And so he said, he expected his followers to do the same. So his disciples, people who really didn't have it together too well, they began healing too. And so you don't have to be some kind of spiritual, mountaintop great person or anything like that. You just walk in and be willing to let God, what God tells you, become your thought.
Well, one of my favorite sayings, all this I do, so shall ye, and even greater.
That's right.
Yeah, wonderful. We're coming down to the end. I'm going to make some announcements, give you a chance to make an announcement, then we'll find something to wrap up on.
All right.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the show. I hope you're getting the message. The message is Spirit Heals. And that is what we're here to carry the message to you. This is for you. Public access television, you are the public. Without you, we don't have anything. And this is my take. This is Mark's take. We sit here and we kind of testify to it. And you don't have to immediately believe it, but you know what? Give it a try. You can't lose anything. So anyway, public TV, public access. I'm here to serve. Love to hear from you about questions you may have about subjects we've had, or maybe there's a show you'd like for me to do. I'd love to hear from you. My information has been flashing on the screen. It'll roll at the ending credits. Let me hear from you. Maybe you have something you want to come on here and talk about that is relevant to spirit. Let's make contact. Let's talk about it. Also, along the lines of being spiritual healing, I am a spiritual counselor. I do not really believe in the talk therapy model. There's some aspects of it that do work, but there's, what we said earlier, and I said it in almost every show, you can't solve the problem with the same instrument that creates the problem. So I incorporate a whole lot of spirituality into a little bit of therapeutic understanding, and I am a spiritual counselor. So if you think that maybe your problems can be healed and resolved spiritually, contact me. Money is not an issue. I work on a strict donation basis, and God takes care of me. It's not up to any one individual. Next week we're going to have a show I've been waiting to do for a couple of years now. We're going to have two folks here from the ARE, which is the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the Edgar Cayce founded organization. As you who kind of watch me and hear me on and off over the years know that Casey and I have a very deep connection. So I'm so looking forward to this show. You want to let them know contacts, this Cordova? Are there any other churches in northern New Mexico?
For people who, most people come to Santa Fe, and so you can go right near the plaza. There's a Christian Science reading room.
That's the upstairs in the plaza, the mall there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just ask one of the, if you ask somebody in a store, they'll point you to where the Christian Science reading room is, and that's where you can get a copy of that book I've been mentioning, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. Mary Baker Eddy, that's her primary work. But also, you've been seeing across the screen www.spirituality.com. And that is a terrific resource. You can go to that website right from your house. You don't have to leave the home to get more ideas on helping you really strengthen your prayers. Now, I have a question. What do you think, we've been talking for about an hour. What do you think are some of the ideas that we've discussed that may be most useful to the viewers today?
I think the most important message that we could ever get out is that we are one with the divine, and all we need to do is tap into it, and it'll create, I don't even like the word miracles, but it'll create experiences in our lives beyond our wildest imagination.
You hear that, folks? He's proven it. So have I. It's something probably each of you have touched on in your lives, maybe in much more dramatic ways than Phil and I ever have. But it's right. He's right. Don't just go at life alone. Don't pray by yourself. Like he said, that oneness you have with God, that's the most valuable possession you'll ever get. It's your oneness with God. I can't tell you how often I walk into a place, I sense the presence of God, and then I feel my oneness with God. That's prayer. I don't just think of myself as close to God or really close to God. No, at one with God. And it's that oneness with God that Phil's talking about. When we yield to that, we yield our thought to that whole thing, and whatever that message may be, that's when we get that healing, that transformation, those changes that really make life new.
One of the phrases I've used repeatedly over the years on air is that our job is not to let God in, our job is to let God out.
Yes. Well, should we do that? All right, let's make that what we do this week. Thank you.
Yeah, set the intentions. I mean, let's talk about that for a second.
Yes.
How do we create without ego?
Good. That intention you're talking about, I think often, people in the big picture with the intentions thing, they often think of religion as a way of kind of identifying what they do wrong. You know what I mean? But no. God is love and is interested in what you do right. And so your intention to do right, it may only be that you're able to maintain that altitude of thought for a minute today. Well, if you can do it for a minute and 30 seconds tomorrow, you're already 50% better. Now, rejoice in what you're doing right and watch for what you do right. That will help bolster your intentions so much. So often people say, well, I only did it for a minute and a half. Hey, Peter only walked on the water for a short time too, but he did it.
One of my teachers used to talk about intentions. And he told the story where somebody going to bed at night prays that God allow me to feed 100 people tomorrow, dies in his sleep, gets the power of that intention because just had that intention, whether he even actually did it or not.
Yes.
The desire to do that
Yes.
is what's so powerful.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know about you. What I try to do is, that helps me with my intention, is to love God. If I love God enough to believe him, then that kind of colors my day. It changes my attitude and my behavior.
Yeah.
It's that love of God. I love him enough to believe him, I guess, for what he's told me.
To be just thankful for the grace that we are receiving on an ongoing basis.
Yes, yes. And it's so much, it's the texture of the day, really.
Texture of life. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, to just, what you and I were talking about, we're going to have to put a wrap on this pretty quickly, but what we had talked about on, right before we got on air was I had mentioned to Mark, when we got together a couple of weeks ago, about my first real guest on my radio show 11, 12 years ago, talked about he was a Sikh, and he was talked about Yogi Bhajan's teachings, that if you don't see God in all, you don't see God at all. And to me, that is the umbrella intention we should be starting our day with, and if I could see God in all, I'm part of all. I've got to see God in me.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it in me. I see it in you too, though. It's shining brightly. It's nice.
Oh, that happens. I mean, and that's the divine. Just that's what happens when we raise our vibration.
Yes.
It's not about the clothes we wear. It's not about makeup, hair color, or any of that other perfumes. It's about spirit shines.
That's it. Yeah.
And the people who are really shining are the ones who don't. You don't need all that other artificial stuff. That's just cover up for the fact that there isn't the shining.
Yes. Yes.
Now I've just made enemies of a whole lot of people, don't I? So we got a couple of minutes. You got a parting thought that you want to add on to?
Well, I would hope that maybe some of the ideas in this show, it's going to be shown 4 different times, so you can go back and watch it again and maybe write down some more ideas about how to strengthen your prayers. As you're praying for the world and you're praying for yourself, take some of these ideas and let them strengthen what you're doing. It doesn't matter what church you go to. God doesn't know what church we are. All God knows is that we have an open heart and that we love the world, we love our fellow man, and that we love God so much that we're willing to stop what we're doing, to be still and let God help us to pray for the world. Let God feed you with the ideas, with the Christly angel messages, you could say, that will help not just today, but for the years to come.
Mark, I thank you so much.
It's been a joy being here.
It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
And for you, the watching audience, the message you've been getting all across the board, denominations. Last week we had a Vedic astrologer. Next week we'll have Edgar Casey's people. Mark, anybody who's been on the show, you hear the same message over and over, and God is within. Bring it out. That it does not matter what your religion is, that you can still find God within you and make use of it and change your life. So until next week, work on that. Live in love and life and just, shine around as best you can. Blessings to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.